September 8th, 2022, Balmoral Castle, Scotland. The phone call came at 4:47 in the morning. Lieutenant James Mackay had been awake for hours. Royal Guards don't sleep much during crisis protocol. He stared at the secure line on his desk, watching it ring once, twice. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the receiver. "She's gone," said the voice on the other end. "Confirm Operation London Bridge." James closed his eyes. The Queen was dead, but what happened in the next 72 hours would change everything. Not just for the royal family, not just for Britain, but for the very survival of the United Kingdom itself. Most people don't know this story. The news showed mourning crowds, black cars, and solemn faces. They showed flags at half-mast and endless queues stretching along the Thames, beautiful, respectful, historic. But behind those images was something else. Something urgent. Something dangerous. Scotland was breaking apart. If you want to hear true stories that never make the headlines, stories about real people and impossible moments, hit that subscribe button now. Because what you're about to hear was kept secret for a reason. James stood from his desk. Outside his window, the Scottish Highlands stretched endlessly into the darkness. Somewhere out there, beyond the castle gates, people were waking up to the news. The Queen, their queen, dead, but in Scotland, she meant something different than she did in London. She was the thread that held a fractured nation together. And now that thread had snapped. His radio crackled. "All units stand ready. We have reports of gatherings forming in Edinburgh and Glasgow." Gatherings? That was the polite word. James knew what they really meant. 3 years earlier, Scotland had nearly voted to leave the United Kingdom. The independence movement had grown stronger every year since. Protests, marches, demands for another referendum. The British government kept saying no, but the anger kept building, and now the one person who commanded respect on both sides of the border was gone. James walked quickly through the stone corridors of Balmoral. His boots echoed against ancient floors. Staff members passed him with red eyes and handkerchiefs. Some nodded. Others looked straight through him, lost in grief. He reached the security command center. 8 screens glowed in the dim room. His commanding officer, Colonel Davies, stood with his arms crossed, watching news feeds from across Scotland. "How bad?" James asked. Davies didn't look away from the screens. "Edinburgh. George Square. Buchanan Street in Glasgow. Crowds forming already. Some with flags. Some with banners. Mourning. Some, but not all." On one screen, James could see what Davies meant. A group of young people, maybe 200 of them, gathering in the pre-dawn darkness. They held candles. But they also held Scottish flags. Psalters, blue and white, waving in the cold morning wind. One banner read, "Our Queen, our choice, our country." James felt his stomach drop. "They're going to use this." "They already are," Davy said quietly. Twitter's exploding. Hashtags about Scottish independence are trending worldwide. Some politicians are calling for an emergency referendum. They're saying the Queen's death is a sign that Scotland should honor her memory by choosing its own path. That's insane. That's politics. Davies finally turned to face him. His expression was grave. "James, listen carefully. The Prime Minister has authorized a classified operation. We need eyes on the ground. Not just security, intelligence. We need to know who's organizing these gatherings, who's funding them. And most importantly, ... he paused. We need to know if this is going to turn violent." James stared at him. Violence? In the days after the Queen's death, it seemed impossible. Britain was mourning. The world was watching. But Davies was right to worry. James had been born in Edinburgh. He knew the passion that burned in Scottish hearts. He knew the old wounds, the old anger, and he knew that grief could turn to rage in a heartbeat. "What do you need me to do?" Davies handed him a file. "There's a man. Professor Malcolm Grant. He teaches history at the University of Edinburgh. He's also one of the most influential voices in the independence movement. Respected, careful, not an extremist, but but he has the power to turn this moment into a revolution. James opened the file. A photo showed a man in his 50s, gray-haired, kind-looking. The kind of person who'd smile at you on the street. "We need you in Edinburgh by noon," Davy said. "Find out what he's planning." "In James?" "Yes, sir." "This mission doesn't exist. If anything goes wrong, you're on your own." The weight of those words settled over James like a stone. He nodded slowly, tucking the file under his arm. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over Scotland. A new day. A new king, and a nation standing at the edge of something no one could predict. James had 8 hours to stop it from falling apart. The train to Edinburgh was packed. James sat in the quiet car, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, a backpack that could belong to any tourist. Nothing about him said royal. Guard. Nothing about him said intelligence. Operative. But the Glock 19 hidden beneath. His jacket told a different story. He watched the Scottish countryside blur past the window. Green hills, stone walls, sheep grazing in morning mist. Beautiful, peaceful, nothing like the chaos brewing in the cities. His phone buzzed. A coded message from Davies, target confirmed at university. "Lecture hall B, 2 p.m., be there." James deleted the message and stared out the window again. He thought about the Queen. He'd met her once. 3 years ago, during a security briefing at Windsor Castle. She'd been 85 then, small and delicate, but her eyes had been sharp. She'd looked at him and asked his name, where he was from. "Edinburgh, Your Majesty." She'd smiled. "A beautiful city. I've always felt at home in Scotland." That was the thing about her. She'd genuinely loved Scotland. Spent every summer at Balmoral. Walked the hills. Attended church in the village. She wasn't just a queen visiting her territory. She was part of the land, and now she was gone. The train pulled into Waverley Station just before noon. James stepped onto the platform and immediately felt the tension in the air. It was subtle but unmistakable. People moved differently. Spoke in hushed tones. Groups clustered around phone screens, reading news updates. Outside the station, the city looked normal. Tourists took photos of Edinburgh Castle looming over the old town. Buses rumbled past. Shop windows displayed their wares. But James noticed the flags. Scottish flags hanging from windows, from balconies, draped over pub doors. More than usual. Many more. He walked toward the university, weaving through crowds of students and locals. The closer he got, the more he noticed the posters. Hastily printed, taped to lamp posts and walls. Remember her legacy? Choose Scotland's future. The Queen loved Scotland. Let Scotland be free, mourn today, decide tomorrow. James's jaw tightened. This wasn't spontaneous grief. This was organized. Someone had prepared these posters in advance. Waiting for this exact moment, he reached the university. Campus at 1:45 p.m. Students sat on the grass in small groups. Some cried. Some argued. James caught fragments of conversation as he passed. ... She would have wanted us to... ... Not about disrespect. It's about ... Never get another chance like this. He found lecture hall B and slipped inside. It was already filling up. Maybe 300 people, mostly students. But James spotted older faces too. Professors, community organizers, journalists. At the front of the hall stood Professor Malcolm Grant. He looked exactly like his photo. Gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a worn cardigan over a button-down shirt. He held a stack of papers and chatted quietly with a colleague. Nothing about him seemed dangerous, but James knew better. Words could be more dangerous than weapons, and the right words at the right moment could ignite a firestorm. The hall quieted as Grant stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you for coming," he began. His voice was steady, warm. "Today is a day of mourning. Queen Elizabeth II served for 70 years. Whatever our political views, whatever our hopes for Scotland's future, we can agree she deserves our respect." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Grant continued, and James leaned forward, Respect for the past does not mean fear of the future. The room went very still. The Queen understood Scotland. She loved our land, our people, our culture. She spent her happiest days at Balmoral. And I believe in her heart she understood something that London refuses to accept. He paused, letting the tension build. Scotland is not a region. Scotland is a nation. Applause erupted. Not everyone clapped, but enough. James scanned the room, noting who applauded loudest, who stood, who recorded on their phones. Grant raised his hand for quiet. In the coming days, we will be told to grieve quietly, to respect protocol, to wait for the coronation of King Charles. And we should grieve. We should be respectful. Another pause. But we should also be honest. The Queen is gone. An era has ended. And when eras end, people have a choice. We can sleepwalk into the next chapter, or we can write it ourselves. Or applause, stronger this time. James's phone vibrated. A message from Davies. We're monitoring social media. This is going live. Multiple streams. James looked around. Sure enough, at least 20 people held up phones, broadcasting to who many viewers. Grant continued. I'm not calling for protests. I'm not calling for disruption, but I am calling for a conversation. A real conversation, not the one Westminster allows us to have when it suits them. The question is simple. What kind of Scotland do we want? A free one. Someone shouted from the back. Grant smiled sadly. We're already free. The question is whether we govern ourselves or remain governed by a parliament 600 kilometers away. A parliament where Scottish votes are always outnumbered. You let that sink in. Tonight, at 8 o'clock, there will be a vigil at Holyrood Park. We'll gather to remember the Queen, to light candles, to share our grief, but also to share our hopes. I invite anyone who believes Scotland deserves a voice to join us. Peacefully, respectfully, but firmly. The applause was thunderous now. James felt his chest tighten. A vigil. Thousands would come. And with that many people, emotions running high, grief mixing with political anger, anything could happen. Grant gathered his papers and left the podium. Students swarmed him, shaking his hand, thanking him. James stayed in his seat, watching, memorizing faces. Then his phone rang. Not a text. Call. From an unlisted number, he stepped outside to answer. James Mackay. The voice was unfamiliar. Scottish accent? Male. Who is this? Someone who knows why you're really in Edinburgh. James's blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Save it. I saw you at the lecture. I know a security agent when I see one. And I know you're here to spy on Malcolm Grant. Who are you? A pause. Then, someone who can help you. Or destroy you. Meet me at Greyfriars Kirkyard in 20 minutes. Come alone. And Lieutenant. Yes. If you bring backup, I disappear. And the story about a royal guard infiltrating the independence movement goes viral within the hour. The line went dead. James stood frozen, heart pounding. He'd been made. His cover was blown. And now someone was playing a game he didn't understand. He had 20 minutes to decide. Walk into a trap, or let Scotland burn. Greyfriars Kirkyard sat in the shadow of Edinburgh's old town. Like something from a ghost story, ancient gravestones leaned at crooked angles. Iron gates creaked in the wind. Tourists normally packed the place, hunting for the grave of Greyfriars Bobby, the famous loyal dog. But today the graveyard was nearly empty. James walked through the entrance at exactly 2:40 p.m. His hand rested inside his jacket, his fingers near his weapon. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every footstep behind him made his muscles tense. He'd texted Davies. Contact made. Meeting informant? Maybe compromised. Davies had replied immediately. Abort. Return to base. James had ignored the order, because if someone knew he was undercover, if someone could blow his identity to the media, this mission was already over. His only chance was to find out who this person was and what they wanted. He walked deeper into the kirkyard, past rows of weathered stones marking graves from the 1600s, names worn smooth by centuries of rain. Dates barely legible. Lieutenant Mackay. James spun around. A woman stood 10 feet away. 40s dark hair pulled back, wearing a long coat and boots. She looked like a professor or a lawyer, professional, calm, but her eyes were hard. "Who are you?" James demanded. "My name is Claire Ross. I work for the Scottish government." "Internal Security Division?" James's mind raced. The Scottish government had its own intelligence apparatus, separate from Westminster. They monitored threats to Scottish interests, gathered information, protected politicians. They were also known for playing rough. "Why am I here?" James asked. Claire walked closer, her heels clicking on the stone path. "Because we have a problem. Both of us. And maybe we can solve it together. I don't work with Scottish intelligence. I know London would rather die than cooperate with us. But London isn't here right now. And you're out of your depth." James bristled. "I can handle my mission." "Your mission is to spy on Malcolm Grant and report back to Westminster whether he's planning something dangerous." "Am I close?" "Too close." James said nothing. Claire smiled without warmth. "I thought so. Here's what you don't know, Lieutenant. Grant isn't your problem. He's a moderate. Yes, he wants independence. Yes, he's charismatic, but he's not a revolutionary. He won't incite violence. He won't break laws. Then why are you worried?" "Because of who's using him." She pulled out her phone and showed James a photo. A young man, maybe 25, with a shaved head and intense eyes. He wore a black jacket covered in patches and pins. "His name is Connor Brennan," Claire said. 3 years ago, he was arrested for throwing a brick through the window of the Conservative Party headquarters in Glasgow. Last year, he organized an illegal blockade of a British Army base near Inverness. He's smart, angry, and he has followers. Lots of them. And he'll be at the vigil tonight. So will about 50 of his people. They call themselves the New Scots Brigade. Sounds romantic, doesn't it? Except they're not interested in candles and prayers. They want to turn that vigil into a statement." James felt ice in his stomach. "What kind of statement?" "The kind that ends with burning Union Jacks and clashes with police. The kind that gets broadcasted worldwide. The kind that makes Scotland look like it's tearing itself apart." She put her phone away and looked at him directly. Right now, the world is watching Scotland with sympathy. The Queen died here, on Scottish soil. People remember how much she loved Balmoral. That's powerful. That's unifying. But if tonight turns violent, if the vigil becomes a riot, that narrative changes instantly. James understood. The headlines would shift from "Scotland mourns beloved Queen" to "Scotland erupts in chaos after Queen's death." It would poison everything. "Why tell me?" James asked. "Why not handle it yourself?" "Because we can't. Scottish police crack down too hard on pro-independence protesters, even violent ones. It plays right into their hands. They'll scream oppression. They'll say Scotland is being controlled by force. We'd be doing exactly what they want. And if British forces intervene, even worse, English soldiers arresting Scottish citizens at a vigil for the Queen, the independence movement would explode overnight." James saw the trap clearly now. Violence helped the extremists. Crackdowns helped the extremists. The only way to win was to stop the violence before it started. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Claire's expression softened slightly. "I need someone who can get close to Connor Brennan. Someone he doesn't know. Someone he'll trust, even for a few hours. My people can't do it. We're all on watch lists. Every activist in Scotland knows our faces. But I'm military. How would I? You're also Scottish. Born in Edinburgh, raised in Leith. You've got the accent, the history, the credibility. And right now, with emotions high, with people angry at London, a Scottish soldier who's questioning his loyalties, Connor would eat that up." James stared at her. "You want me to go undercover?" "With extremists? Tonight. I want you to stop a disaster. If it goes wrong, if they figure out who I am, then you'll be lucky if you only end up in a hospital. The wind picked up, rustling through bare tree branches. A crow cawed somewhere above them. James thought about the mission, about his orders, about the Queen. Why do you care? He asked quietly. You work for the Scottish government. You want independence. Why stop something that could push Scotland in that direction? Claire was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer. "'Cause I'm Scottish, Lieutenant. I love this country. I want it to be independent someday, yes. But not like this. Not born in violence and chaos. Not hijacked by extremists who don't care about Scotland, only about their own anger." She stepped closer. The Queen loved Scotland. She spent her summers here, walked our hills, knew our people, and when she died, she was here. On our soil. That means something. It should mean something. Not riots. Not hatred. Something better. James felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about what kind of country Scotland would become. "If I do this," he said, "I need resources, backup communications. I'll have it all. But you'll be alone in the field. We can't risk exposure. And if I find something, if Connor's planning something specific, you stop it, whatever it takes." James looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't lying. She was just as desperate as he was. He said, "I'm in." Claire handed him a small earpiece and a phone. "The earpiece is encrypted. I'll be listening the whole time. The phone has contact info for Connor. He posted publicly about meeting at a pub before the vigil. The halfway house on Flesh Market Close. Be there at 6. And my cover story. You're James McLeod, former Army medic, dishonorably discharged for questioning orders during a deployment in Iraq. You came home to Edinburgh, heard about the Queen's death, and realized you're done serving British interests. You want to fight for Scotland now? Will that work? It better. Because if it doesn't, you and I both lose everything." She turned to walk away, then stopped. "Lieutenant, the Queen used to say something in private. My colleague heard her say it once at Holyrood Palace. She said Scotland doesn't need to be controlled. It needs to be loved." Claire looked back at him. "Remember that tonight. When things get hard, remember what she believed?" Then she was gone, disappearing between the gravestones like a ghost. James stood alone in the kirkyard, holding the earpiece and phone. The wind felt colder now, the shadows deeper. In 4 hours, he'd walk into a pub full of people who hated everything he stood for, and he'd have to convince them he was one of them. The halfway house was packed by the time James arrived. He pushed through the door at 6:15 p.m. 15 minutes late on purpose? Appearing too eager would raise suspicion. Better to look reluctant, like someone still figuring out if they belonged. The pub smelled like beer and old wood. Scottish flags hung from the ceiling. A television in the corner showed news coverage of the Queen's death on mute. Photos of her at Balmoral. Video of the royal family arriving at the castle. No one was watching. Instead, the crowd was focused on a man standing on a table in the back corner. Young, muscular, shaved head. Connor Brennan. Even from across the room, James could feel the energy radiating from him. ... And they expect us to bow our heads and accept it, Connor was saying, his voice cutting through the noise. They expect us to mourn quietly, like good little subjects, while they prepare to crown another English king over Scottish land. Cheers erupted. Fists pounded on tables. James made his way to the bar, keeping his head down. The earpiece was tucked deep in his ear canal, invisible. He could hear Claire's voice, faint but clear. "I've got you. Stay calm. Get close to him." "Whiskey," James told the bartender. "Neat." The bartender, an older man with suspicious eyes, studied him. "Haven't seen you before?" "Just got back to Edinburgh." "From where?" "Iraq Army medic." The bartender's expression changed, softened slightly. "Rough tour?" "Something like that." James paid and turned to watch Connor, who had climbed down from the table and was now surrounded by supporters. They were young, mostly. Students, activists, workers. all wearing some version of the same look, black clothes, Scottish flag pins, anger in their eyes. But there was something else, too. Hope. They believed they were part of something bigger than themselves. James recognized that look. He'd seen it in soldiers before their first deployment. The dangerous combination of idealism and adrenaline. "You here for the vigil?" someone asked. James turned. A woman, maybe 30, with red hair and a leather jacket. She held a pint and watched him with interest. "Thinking about it," James said carefully. "Thinking? On a day like today? I don't know where I stand yet." The woman smiled. "Honest, I like that. Most people pretend they've always been sure. But this," she gestured around the pub, "this is new for a lot of us. The Queen dying. Everything changing. It's okay to be confused. What's your name?" James asked. "Fiona? You?" James McLeod." They shook hands. Her grip was strong. "You should talk to Connor," Fiona said. "He's good at helping people figure out where they stand." "I don't want to bother him. He loves meeting new people. Especially ex-military." "Come on." Before James could object, Fiona was pulling him through the crowd toward Connor. James's pulse quickened. This was happening faster than he'd expected. Connor turned as they approached. Up close, he was younger than James had thought. Baby-faced beneath the shaved head. But his eyes were old. Hard. "Connor, this is James," Fiona said. "Ex-Army. Just got back from Iraq." Connor's expression sharpened. "Iraq? What unit?" 23 Parachute Field Ambulance. James lied, using a real unit name he'd memorized. "Served 3 tours, and now you're here. Now I'm home." Connor studied him for a long moment. James forced himself to stay relaxed, to meet Connor's eyes without flinching. Finally, Connor smiled. "What changed?" "What?" "You served 3 tours. That's dedication. That's believing in something. So what changed? Why are you standing in this pub instead of watching the news with the rest of the military, mourning the Queen with your unit?" This was the test. James knew it. Everything depended on his answer. He took a breath. "I watched people die. British soldiers, Iraqi civilians, everyone. And the whole time I kept telling myself we were there for a good reason. Protecting freedom. Bringing democracy. All the lines they feed you, and one day I was treating a kid, maybe 7 years old, caught in a crossfire. I'm trying to stop the bleeding, trying to save him, and he looks at me with these eyes. And I realized he saw me as the enemy. Not the people who shot him. Me. Because I was wearing a British uniform on Iraqi soil." James paused, letting emotion creep into his voice. "I came home and started asking questions. About empire. About colonialism. About what Britain has done to Ireland, to India, to every place it ever planted a flag. And I realized Scotland is just another colony. We've been occupied so long, we forgot what freedom looks like." The pub had gone quiet. People were listening. Connor stepped closer. "You're angry? I'm awake." Connor's smile widened. "Good. We need angry. We need awake. Too many people are sleepwalking through this moment." Put a hand on James's shoulder. "The vigil tonight isn't just about mourning. It's about making a statement. Showing Westminster that Scotland won't be ignored anymore. You should come. I plan to. No, I mean really come. With us, we're going early, before the crowds, to set up. We need people who can handle themselves if things get tense." James felt Claire's voice in his ear say, "Yes. This is your chance." "What do you mean, if things get tense?" James asked. Connor glanced around, then lowered his voice. "The police will be there. They'll try to control the narrative. Keep everything polite and peaceful. We can't let that happen. This vigil needs to be loud. It needs to be powerful. It needs to show the world that Scotland is ready to fight for its future." "You're talking about a protest?" "I'm talking about truth." James hesitated, playing the part of someone still uncertain. "I didn't come here to start fights, neither did we. But if someone tries to silence us, if British police try to shut down a vigil on Scottish soil, then we defend ourselves." We defend our right to speak. Fiona put a hand on James's arm. It won't come to that. We're just being prepared. But James saw the glint in Connor's eyes. The anticipation. Connor wanted it to come to that. He wanted confrontation. He wanted cameras capturing Scottish activists clashing with police at the Queen's vigil. It would be perfect propaganda. All right, James said. I'm in. Connor grinned and squeezed his shoulder. Welcome to the fight, brother. As the crowd returned to drinking and planning, James felt Claire's voice again. Good work. Stay with them. Find out the plan. But James's mind was racing. This was bigger than he'd thought. Connor wasn't just planning a disruptive vigil. He was planning a confrontation. He wanted violence, and he had at least 50 people willing to help him create it. The pub's television suddenly switched channels. Someone had turned up the volume. The news anchor's voice filled the room. Breaking news. The Prince and Princess of Wales will attend tonight's vigil at Holyrood Park, representing the royal family in Scotland. The pub erupted in angry shouts. Connor jumped back onto the table, eyes blazing. You hear that? They're sending William and Kate to stand above us, to control the narrative, to make sure we stay quiet and obedient. He raised his voice over the noise. But we won't be quiet, and we won't be controlled. Tonight, Scotland makes its voice heard. Whatever it takes. The crowd roared its approval. James stood frozen, his whiskey untouched in his hand. William and Kate would be there. At the vigil, with thousands of mourners and dozens of extremists ready to turn grief into chaos, in Claire's ear, he heard her say one word. Fuck. The mission had just become infinitely more dangerous, because if anything happened to the Prince and Princess of Wales on Scottish soil, during a vigil for the Queen, the United Kingdom wouldn't just fracture, it would explode. Holyrood Park sat at the foot of Arthur's Seat, Edinburgh's ancient volcanic peak. By 7:30 p.m., the park was already filling with people. Thousands of them. They came carrying candles and flowers, wearing black, moving in quiet streams toward the designated vigil area. Families, students, elderly couples holding hands. All of Edinburgh seemed to be converging on this single spot. James walked with Connor's group, staying near the middle of the pack. They'd left the pub at 7, 50 strong, moving through the streets like a dark current against the flow of normal mourners. Connor walked at the front, confident and focused. Fiona was beside him, along with a half-dozen others James had marked as the core group. The true believers. Stay alert, Claire's voice whispered in his ear. William and Kate are en route. Ada, 15 minutes. Security is tight, but they're exposed. If Connor makes a move, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The vigil site was a large open area between the park's entrance and the base of the hill. Organizers had set up a stage with microphones, a sound system, and screens showing photos of the Queen at Balmoral. Candles in paper bags lined pathways. Scottish pipers played in the distance, their music haunting and beautiful. It should have been peaceful, but James could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. There, Connor said, pointing to a spot near the stage. That's where we set up. His group fanned out, positioning themselves strategically. Not together in an obvious cluster, but spread throughout the crowd in a loose network. Close enough to coordinate. Far enough to avoid attention, James noticed they were all wearing the same thing, black jackets with a small blue and white pin. The Scottish flag. A signal to each other. What's the plan? James asked Fiona quietly. She glanced at him. For a moment, he thought she might not answer. Then she leaned close. When William and Kate arrive, the organizers will ask everyone to be respectful. They'll probably want silence, or maybe a hymn. Something dignified, and we won't be silent. Connor's going to speak, really speak, about what the Queen's death means for Scotland. About independence. About choice. If they try to stop him, if they try to stop him, what? Fiona's expression hardened. Then we make sure the world knows Scotland's voice can't be silenced. Not even by royalty. James felt sick. You're going to disrupt the vigil. We're going to honor the Queen by telling the truth. She loved Scotland. She'd want us to be honest about our future. Before James could respond, a ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turned. Phones came out. "They're here," someone said. William and Kate appeared at the edge of the park, flanked by security. They looked somber, dressed in black, moving slowly toward the stage. Kate held a bouquet of white flowers. William's face was drawn with grief. The crowd parted for them automatically. Some people reached out, touching their shoulders, offering condolences. William and Kate smiled sadly, nodded, kept walking. James watched Connor watching them. His jaw was set. His hands were clenched. "Now," Connor said into his phone. "Everyone in position." The people with blue and white pins began moving, slowly, casually, toward the stage, closing in like a net. James spoke quietly, knowing Claire could hear him through the earpiece. "He's making his move. What do I do?" "You stop him. No matter what. But how?" James was one person. Connor had 50. Security was focused on protecting William and Kate, not on monitoring the crowd for troublemakers. William and Kate reached the stage. A minister stepped forward to welcome them. The crowd settled into respectful quiet, thousands of candles flickering in the gathering dusk. "Your Royal Highnesses," the minister began. "Thank you for joining us tonight as Scotland mourns." Connor jumped onto a barrier near the stage, raising his voice loud enough to cut through the silence. "And as Scotland chooses its future." Heads snapped toward him. Security tensed. William turned, surprised. "The Queen loves Scotland," Connor shouted. "She spent her summers here. She walked our hills. She knew our people. And she knew something Westminster refuses to admit. Scotland is a nation, not a region." Some people in the crowd cheered. Others shouted for him to be quiet, to respect the moment. Connor pressed on. "We honor her memory not by bowing to a new king, but by choosing for ourselves what Scotland becomes. She died on Scottish soil. Let that mean something." Let that security move toward him. Two officers, hands out, trying to de-escalate, and that's when Connor's people acted. 50 people with blue and white pins suddenly pushed forward, forming a barrier between Connor and the security officers. They linked arms, creating a human chain. "Let him speak." They chanted, "Let him speak." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some people joined the chanting. Others screamed at them to stop. Candles fell. Someone pushed. Someone pushed back. James saw it spiraling out of control in real dash time. William and Kate's security team closed around them instantly, preparing to evacuate. But the crowd was packed too tight. Moving them would cause a stampede. Connor kept shouting, his voice rising above the chaos. "Scotland will not be silenced. Scotland will not." James made his decision. He pushed through the crowd, moving fast, using his training to slip between bodies. People cursed at him, but he didn't stop. He reached the human chain protecting Connor and grabbed one of the men by the arm. "Military coming," James shouted, leaning close. "Armed response unit. They think this is a threat to the royals. If you don't disperse now, this ends in arrests or worse." The man's eyes went wide. "What? There's no military? Look around. Those aren't regular cops anymore." James pointed randomly at security officers in the distance. In the chaos and darkness, it was impossible to tell who was who. Fear flickered across the man's face. He turned to the person next to him. "Is that true? Are they armed?" The uncertainty spread through the chain. People hesitated, looked around nervously. Connor felt the energy shift. He turned, spotted James. "What are you doing?" Connor demanded. James climbed up beside him. "Saving your life, you idiot." "Look," he pointed at William and Kate's security detail. "Those aren't palace security anymore. Those are counterterrorism. The second you made a move near the royals, you became a threat. They will put you down if this escalates." Connor's face twisted with anger. "That's exactly the point. Let them. Let the world see British security attacking Scottish patriots at the Queen's vigil. They'll bury the footage. They'll call you a terrorist. They'll make sure no one remembers your message, only your arrest, or your body. For the first time, doubt crossed Connor's face. James leaned closer, speaking fast. You want to make a statement? Then make one that lasts. Walk away now. Let them think they won. Then tomorrow, hold a press conference. Tell your story without the chaos. Let people hear your words instead of just seeing violence. That's coward talk. That's strategy. Malcolm Grant would tell you the same thing. The mention of Grant's name hit home. Connor respected Grant, even if he thought the professor was too cautious. Around them, the crowd was still in chaos. Security was advancing. The human chain was breaking apart. People scared and confused. Connor stared at William and Kate, who stood on the stage, protected but watching. Their faces showed not anger but sadness, and maybe something else. Understanding, Connor closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed. Everyone stand down, he said into his phone. Retreat. Peaceful retreat. Now, his people hesitated, confused, but they obeyed. The human chain dissolved. People melted back into the crowd. Connor jumped down from the barrier and grabbed James's arm hard. If this was a trick, if you just made me look weak, you didn't look weak. You looked smart. There's a difference. Connor stared at him for a long moment. Then he let go and walked away. Disappearing into the crowd with his followers, James stood alone near the stage, breathing hard, heart pounding. On the stage, the minister was trying to restore calm. William leaned to whisper something to Kate, then stepped forward to the microphone. Please, William said, his voice quiet but steady. Please, everyone. Tonight is about remembrance. About love. My grandmother adored Scotland. She found peace here. Whatever our disagreements, whatever our futures, can we give her this one night? Can we honor her with the peace she loved? The crowd stilled. People wiped tears. Slowly, the candles were relit. The pushing stopped. And in that moment, James realized something profound. Connor's disruption had failed, but William's response had succeeded. Not through force, through grace. That was the difference between revolution and leadership. Claire's voice filled his ear. You did it. Stand by for extraction. But James didn't move. He stayed and watched as William and Kate led the vigil in a moment of silence. As thousands of people held their candles high, as Scotland mourned not with violence but with dignity, the Queen would have been proud. 3 days later, Lieutenant James Mackay stood in Colonel Davies's office at Balmoral Castle. The castle was quieter now. The initial rush of arrangements had passed. The Queen's body had been transported to London. The royal family had returned south. What remained was paperwork, debriefings, and the slow work of processing what had happened. You disobeyed a direct order, Davies said. Standing by the window overlooking the Highlands, James said nothing. I told you to abort the mission when your contact appeared. You ignored me. You went into that pub alone. You infiltrated a group of extremists. You made decisions in the field that could have resulted in an international incident. Davies turned to face him. You should be court-martialed. James kept his eyes forward. Yes, sir, but you're not going to be. James looked up in surprise. Davies walked to his desk and picked up a folder. Do you know what happened after the vigil? The story that could have dominated headlines? Royal security clashes with Scottish activists at Queen's Memorial. That would have been a disaster. It would have poisoned the funeral, divided the country, given ammunition to every separatist in Scotland. He set the folder down. Instead, the headline was United in Grief. William and Kate lead Scotland in powerful vigil for the Queen. Every major outlet, every broadcast. The story wasn't about division. It was about unity. I just did what needed to be done, sir. You did more than that. You prevented a crisis that would have had consequences for decades. Davies sat down, suddenly looking very tired. The Prime Minister has been briefed. So has the King. They're grateful, though they'll never say so publicly. This mission, officially, never happened. Your report will be sealed, But off the record, Lieutenant, he met James's eyes. Thank you. You saved more than you know. James nodded slowly. What about Connor Brennan? And his group? Under surveillance. But here's the interesting thing. After that night, Connor gave an interview to a Scottish newspaper. He said the vigil taught him something. That real change doesn't come from anger or confrontation. It comes from building something worth believing in. He said that, in so many words, he's still pro-independence, still organizing, but he's not talking about disruption anymore. He's talking about dialogue, about referendum campaigns, about democracy. Davies smiled slightly. Whatever you said to him on that barrier, it stuck. James thought back to that moment, the chaos, the fear. The choice Connor made to walk away. He was never a bad person, James said quietly. Just angry. He needed to see there was another way. Most extremists do. There was a knock on the door. Claire Ross entered, looking official in a dark suit. Lieutenant, she said with a nod. Ms. Ross. Davy stood. I'll give you to a moment. James, you're dismissed for the day. Get some rest. You've earned it. He left, closing the door behind him. Claire and James stood in awkward silence for a moment. I owe you an apology, Claire finally said. I threw you into an impossible situation with almost no preparation. You could have been killed, but I wasn't. No, you weren't. She smiled slightly. You're good at this? Better than most trained intelligence officers I know. I'm not interested in intelligence work. I'm a soldier. No. But if you ever change your mind, Scottish security could use someone like you. Someone who understands both sides. James shook his head. I don't think I understand either side anymore. Claire studied him. What do you mean? He walked to the window, looking out at the same view Davies had been watching. The Scottish Highlands stretched endlessly, beautiful and ancient and complicated. I grew up in Edinburgh, James said. I joined the British Army because I believed in service, in duty, in protecting the United Kingdom. Then I spent 3 days undercover, listening to people talk about independence, about self-determination, about Scotland's future. And some of what they said, ... made sense? He turned to face her. I also watched William and Kate at that vigil, saw how much they cared, how genuine their grief was, how hard they tried to honor the Queen and respect Scotland at the same time. That made sense too. So where does that leave you? I don't know. Confused, maybe? But also hopeful. Hopeful. James nodded. The Queen spent 70 years holding this country together, not through force, not through politics, through love, through respect, through actually caring about all the different people and places that make up the United Kingdom. He thought about her words, the ones Claire had shared in the graveyard. Scotland doesn't need to be controlled. It needs to be loved. Maybe that's the answer, James said. Not independence or union. Not nationalism or loyalism. Just actually caring about each other. Listening. Building something together that respects everyone's identity. Claire smiled. That's optimistic, maybe. But I watched it work at that vigil. When William spoke, people listened. Not because he gave orders, because he showed respect. He acknowledged their grief and their feelings. He didn't tell them what to think. He just asked them to remember what his grandmother loved in Connor. Connor realized violence wouldn't honor what he believed in, that destruction isn't the same as creation. James crossed his arms. The Queen's death could have torn Scotland and the UK apart. Instead, it gave everyone a moment to pause, to remember what they loved about her. And maybe, in remembering what they loved about her, they remembered what they could love about each other. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You know what the hardest part of my job is? Not the threats. Not the politics. It's the cynicism. Constantly assuming the worst about people. Always looking for danger. And you've reminded me that sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they choose grace over anger, even when they have every reason not to." She extended her hand. "Thank you, Lieutenant. For everything? James shook it. What happens now? With the independence movement, it continues. Scotland's debate about its future isn't over. It probably won't be for a long time. But maybe after this week, the conversation will be different. More thoughtful. Less angry? I hope so. Claire headed for the door, then paused. The Queen's funeral is in 5 days. Westminster Abbey. I'm sure you'll be on duty. I will. There'll be representatives from Scotland there. Politicians, activists, ordinary people, all coming to say goodbye to someone who loved their country. She smiled. Maybe that's the real lesson. You don't have to agree on everything to mourn together. You don't have to choose the same future to honor the same past. Then she was gone. James stood alone in the office, watching the sun set over Scotland. In 5 days, he'd be in London, standing at attention as the world said goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II. He'd wear his uniform. He'd follow orders. He'd serve the crown, but he'd also carry something new with him. An understanding that duty didn't mean blindness. That service didn't mean silence. That loving your country meant listening to all its voices, even the ones that challenged you. The Queen had understood that. She'd spent 7 decades building bridges instead of walls. And in her death, she'd done it one more time. James pulled out his phone and scrolled through news headlines. The funeral preparations, the guest lists, the ceremonies being planned, but one story caught his eye. Malcolm Grant and Scottish leaders call for respectful dialogue on independence post-referendum. James smiled. The conversation was continuing, but it was continuing differently. He thought about Connor, about Fiona, about all the young people at that vigil who wanted something better for Scotland. They were still fighting, still organizing, still believing, but they were doing it with hope instead of hate. That was the Queen's final gift. Not resolving the question of Scotland's future, but showing everyone that, whatever future they chose, it could be done with dignity. James closed his phone and took one last look at the Highlands. Then he turned and walked out of the office. Ready for whatever came next? The Queen was gone. But what she'd built. The idea that a nation could hold together not through force but through love, that would live on, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep the United Kingdom united. Not forever, perhaps, but for now. For today, for the chance to build something better tomorrow that was worth protecting, that was worth serving, and that, James realized, was what the Royal Guard's secret role had always been. Not just protecting royalty, but protecting the possibility that different people, with different dreams, could still find common ground. The Queen had believed in that possibility until her last breath, and now it was up to everyone else to prove she'd been right.